Ladies and gentlemen, tank review time. Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder, to the tank review on the French rewards tank that is the AMX-50 Surblindé. The question is this tank worth it, as it is the reward for the World War mode Recon Under Fire Season 1. And there is a limited number out there, and they get already sold on the marketplace from prices starting with 200 Gaijin coins. The tank is very similar to the AMX-50 Surbaissé. Gaijin has given me this tank fully upgraded for a test drive for 7 days, for which I am very thankful, and I don't have this tank, so I'm a little bit jealous for all of you that have it, as I am a I am known as a collector and I want to get my hands on as much as possible. One of the reasons why I started YouTube, so I can request stuff. But this one is only given out for test drives, Gaijin policy, I guess. So I want to give you a full rundown on the statistics of this tank and compare it to its major opponents on the battlefield with a similar design approach or a similar name like heavy tank. And also I want to, well, show you how to play this tank in a meta that is reigned by APFSDS and stabilizers. I personally love the approach of design of this tank when it comes to the overlap of 4 different nations. What I'm talking here about is obviously we have the Russian style pike nose design that, for example, we get on the IS-3. Then we have this fantastic 120mm gun, which is, I guess, of American origin or extremely similar. Then obviously we have a lot of German technology like the transmission and the tracks from the Tiger II, a German 20mm MG151-20, and in the engine we have also an engine from the Tiger tanks. So how does this fit together and how well can you do with this tank? Well, this shall be now explained, and as usual I'll begin with the armor. I want to begin with the armor, and we begin with the lower glacis, 100mm thick, nearly 60 degrees angles of attack, so like the upper frontal glacis of a T-54, and it is a rather small target, and since you are mostly shooting from slightly above, the angle gets even increased. Effective thickness approaches 250mm, but the likes of Hash and Heat will still punch through easily, but APHE or APCBC rounds get ricocheted or absorbed very often. Then the upper part of the pike nose design is rolled homogeneous armor of 110mm thickness, but lesser angles. And then the effective thickness ranges between 180 to, well, 190mm, but still most APHE, including the German 128mm, very often gets absorbed. The side cheeks here are not thinner, well, they are thinner in thickness, but they have a little bit of more side angling, as you can maybe see from here, and that increases their effective thickness line of sight wise above 200 towards 210mm, and that is also pretty nice. So to get the most out of this pike nose design, you need to present the surface of the front of the front armor directly toward the enemy. Do not angle, otherwise the angle gets reduced for one plate, and then you can punch right through. The last bit of frontal armor is here this driver hatch, 50mm of cast homogeneous armor, but it's again a rather small target, and again it's steeply angled, so it also can, with a lucky roll of the dice of the RNG dices, it can cause a ricochet or an absorption. Then let's come to the side of the tank, and it is a huge profile, and the armor thickness ranges between 75 and 60mm, so not really enough to absorb 30mm autocannon fire, especially with APDS, or even 40mm with AP rounds straight from the side. Despite the slight addition of tracks and interlocking road wheel armor, it can help sometimes, but don't count on it. That brings us then to the rear of the tank, again 60mm. Engine deck is 30mm, and 5mm, so even machine gun rounds from aircraft can punch through those parts, but they are not really that prominent, yet they can set you on fire. Then the top of the turret is only 20mm, so even more vulnerable than the engine deck. Then we come to this oscillating turret, and that is a little bit more interesting when it comes to the armor. We have this lower lip armor part here that has 100mm of cast homogeneous armor, and the angling ranges between 20 to 34, 35 to, in those parts, even 69 degrees of angling, which is pretty powerful. But still, most parts are not that well protected. Again, APDS, hash, heat, and APHE even will punch right through. The funny thing is, versus hash rounds and APHE rounds, is that there is also an inner part, whereas APDS might still punch right through it, including heat. The like of hash and APHE, the post-penetration damage effect, gets absorbed in the void between those two armor plates, so it acts a little bit as spaced armor. But the driver is not so lucky, and he always gets hit in the head by the rest of the shrapnels. Then the upper part of the turret is only 85mm thick, ranging between 47 and 52 degrees of angling, and again, most guns will punch right through from serious tanks. And then we have those two cupolas of 40mm, and this cupola as well, 40mm, that has a rangefinder with 110mm on the majority of hitting surface. But again, the majority of APHE rounds will punch right through, and the side armor of the turret is ranging between from 100mm to 60 to 40mm, so even 30mm is here the case, so yeah, it's not really that strong. The next thing is, let's talk about the X-ray, because it's really interesting. And we can see that the tank has 4 crew members, of which the driver sits in the front middle, the gunner and the commander are on the right hand side, and the loader of this autoloader, if you will, sits on the left hand side. The gun breech is a substantial target, but it's not the greatest, yet everybody goes for it. It's just that kind of high tier syndrome, especially if you fight the likes of 8.7 premium tanks with gun stabilizers and APFSDS. They automatically, with muscle memory, will aim right there, punch through the armor despite your good gun mantlet, and disable this. Then there is also a lot of ammunition, namely 18 rounds in the back of the turret, and you have to be very careful, because this is, as I said, only protected with armor between 40 and 30mm, and there is always ammunition. You can take out the rest of the ammunition right there, and it is very well distributed, so if you go into battle with full ammunition load, it's pretty difficult to pan the hull and not hit ammunition, let's put it that way. So for the rest of the tank, if you punch through it for the hull from the side and there is no ammunition, there is a lot of empty space where APDS, APFSDS do no damage at all, again, if the ammunition is taken out. The power pack with the transmission, engine and fuel tanks is all in the back of the tank. One final note here is that this vertical aiming drive is very vulnerable and gets knocked out very often, so you cannot elevate or depress the gun at all if this is disabled, and as I said, it gets hit repeatedly. So that now leaves the other two parts of the tank not discussed up until the point of now, which is mobility and firepower. When it comes to the mobility of the AMX-50 Surblindé, we don't have a bad start with a 1000 horsepower engine, which is significantly stronger than the Surbaissé's engine. However, we're also significantly heavier with 70 tons straight. In comparison, this gives us a nice 14.3 horsepower to ton ratio, which is kind of average, very similar to the Surbaissé, the M103 and also the Chieftain. However, thanks to the good tracks in the shape of having good ground pressure, you are actually not feeling all that heavy and you can turn quite nicely. But it is to be recommended to use roads to actually use the top speed of 51 km per hour in a straight line, which you actually then can reach quite comfortably. On medium terrain though, you're somewhere between 35 and 40 kilometers per hour, and you really feel then the difference to other tanks like the Leopard 1 only when really going uphill. Now, what is really un-French-like and a bit disappointing and really is feelable in the playstyle is the limitation to 5 kilometers per hour backwards. That is really not all that great, despite having here neutral steering. So you can see the tank is not that bad when it comes to moving around on the battlefield going from A to B. But now, let's talk about the business end of the tank. And that is the fantastic 120mm SA-46 gun. It is the very same gun with the very same autoloader as on the AMX-50 Surbaissé, but it holds more ammunition. Yet the same ammunition gets fired, and the gun is also very similar to the M103. The joint best reload here with 6 seconds is again shared with the Surbaissé, and this is again an autoloader, so it does not depend on crew skills, unlike the other tanks such as the Leopard 1 and Chieftain Mark V that come close with the reload, even as down as 11.7% with a fully trained ace crew, but again not really matching it. Equally good is the turret rotation speed. 24 degrees per second is fantastic and is joint best together with the M103 and also the Leopard 1. Only the AMX-50 Surbaissé is better with 30 degrees per second. Another difference to the AMX-50 Surbaissé is the gun depression, because we have here only -6 degrees. While not being as disastrously bad as the Russians -3 and -4 for the IS-7 and T-10M respectively, it is still feelable that in many situations you just can't get the gun down enough and you have to reposition or you can fire back at the enemy. The gun elevation is by far the worst. 10 degrees is very limiting if you are working ridge lines or if somebody is below you. The elevation speed, on the other hand, with 5 degrees per second is okayish. It's not the best, that goes to the Leopard 1, but amongst the other heavy tanks it is the best. Not by much, but still feelable. So the gun system is really nice. Now let's have a look at the ammunition. The tank has access to only 2 different shell types, the first one being the 120mm obus de rupture, which is the stock armor piercing round. It has a muzzle velocity of 1067 meters per second, which is really nice, and it can penetrate up to 300 millimeters of armor. And it also keeps that penetration value over quite some distance, as well as having maybe not the very best of normalization. A lot of the armor interaction rules and a lot of the overmatch mechanics can come in handy, but this is not a guaranteed lol pen shell. Yet when it penetrates, the post-penetration damage effect is far superior to any sort of APFSDS or APDS round, and can even match in some cases the damage output of armor-piercing high explosive shells despite not having any sort of TNT. The fragmentation is just absolutely stunning, deeply satisfying, very reliable, and just got a tank entirely completely from the front to the back. The second shell type is also the second stock shell, and that is the 120mm obus explosif high explosive shell. It travels at a much slower muzzle velocity of only 762 meters per second, but it holds an astonishing TNT equivalent of 4.65 kilograms, resulting in a kinetic penetration value of up to 43 millimeters, but goes down when it comes to the pure blast penetration of 39 millimeters. But as we can see in the shell comparison, this is still amongst the best for pure high explosive shells. Obviously, hash rounds have different mechanics. And that is the last shell. The problem is that it is, with the current patch, not that reliable, but it has its use. And as an update, or as a secondary weapon if you will, you have a roof-mounted 20mm MG151-20, which can threaten helicopters and planes alike, as well as deal with open-top vehicles or very thinly armored vehicles from the side and disable them. You can track enemies, etc. And that is all the tools that you have available. And now we're already on the Fulda Gap map, which is the final gameplay. And while I am destroying here enemy armor quite efficiently at range, which is something that I absolutely love, let's talk about the experience of playing this tank. And to be honest, this tank could be in a much better spot, but the compression of technology in War Thunder, especially with a lot of the premium tanks, well, it takes just its toll. Now, what I'm talking here about is that this tank has a fantastic gun and a fantastic ammunition. It's very basic yet very effective. However, there are enemies like the Type 74G, like the OF40 MTCA, like the Leopard with the L44, etc, etc, T55 AM1, and also the XM1, which you will face on a regular basis, that just have APFSDS and gun stabilizer, completely bypassing your armor effectively, and also disabling you, and also having the advantage of very often getting in the first shot in. So this is, together with the overwhelming appearance of helicopters, just something that absolutely ruins this tank. And as we could see, it might have some advantages compared to the AMX-50 Surbaissé, but most of the time the Surbaissé is just simply better, and it is a free tech tree version. Already this tank gets sold on the marketplace for up to 200 Gaijin coins. I'm personally a little bit disappointed that this tank was again given out as a rather rare reward, and together with the fact that you cannot really use it as a grinder, since it is first of all stock when you get it. Also, it doesn't have a premium status, much like the IS-7 and the 100 or the Merkava therefore. So this is just simply a downside. Can you use it in a lineup? That's obviously the other question. The answer is yes, kind of, with the AMX-50 Surbaissé, the AMX-30 DCA. Obviously then the AMX-50 Foch is still effective, and all the AMX-30s, be it premium or normal, are also at rank 4 effective. So there is a nice lineup, and it's always nice to have a second heavy tank, but people that actually create lineups for good to really be as competitive as possible at this battle rating will note that yeah, after the Surbaissé, why would you want to use the same tank again when you can get just backups by simply playing the tank? And it has its limitations. So if you come across a lot of other tanks that are even faster or have better gun systems, etc., I don't think that after you get killed in the Surbaissé that the Surblindé brings a lot more flexibility to the battlefield. I think that it is a nice tank, and it is deeply satisfying to play if it works, but most of the time you just get up-tiered versus 8.7s, and they just, together with helicopters, ruin your day for good. That's just how it is, and if I would say otherwise, I would not share my experience with you that I gained in playing this tank for quite some battles. Another drawback for this tank is obviously the map rotation. I think at 8.0 I have never come across that often American Desert, Alaska and Italy in such a normal rotation like I have with 8.0. Especially American Desert and Alaska were just exchanging each other, and that was really not my cup of tea, to be honest. That is something that I personally don't like. If you like this, well, then go for this tank and buy it. But I think that 200 Gaijin coins are way too much, and I think that the community is a bit elusive on how much such a tank is actually worth. And in my opinion, I think that this tank is probably worth 50 Gaijin coins because also of the collector's worth, but not 200, not 200. So in the future, the matchmaker will get worse. We will see more compression instead of less, and the tank will have more and more difficulties. And already it is pretty painful to play against tanks head-on that have also stabilizer and APFSDS, neglecting all your advantages. And while it is really deeply satisfying if you get kills like these, it is not very often the case, sadly. Again, matchmaker, up tiers, map rotation, so many things are not working in this tank's favor, and yet it has its moments. So while I am heavily biased towards this kind of gun tanks that have this massive rounds, especially with an autoloader where they have a decent reload and the mobility, it's really nice to play. But again, it's not worth 200 Gaijin coins just forget it. I think the true value for me personally as a tank that doesn't have premium status and that comes stock is roughly 30 Gaijin coins, and that only if you're a collector. So that's this battle. That's the most successful I managed to get, and those were 6 kills and a survivor. So let's have a quick look at the post-battle results and let's see what is what. It was a quick match, it was a short match, and with not a lot of players, and so I think 36,000 silver lines and 4,478 modification research points is quite okay, but a significant part goes down to the survivor award, and we also were first in team. And that is the review of the AMX-50 Surblindé, a tank that I personally quite like, but it's actually not all that nice to play, and it took me quite a while to collect here the necessary footage and show what the tank can do under the very best of circumstances. Most of the time you get one shot by APFSDS, by some drifty tank, and then that's your battle in this tank. That's it from me today. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this review. Please give it a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, share it with your friends and clanmates, and we'll see each other in the skies, on the waves, and on the battlefields of War Thunder.